Hey everyone, this week I want to take you to two boroughs. First, we will take a look at Polo Grounds in Upper Manhattan, and then walk over the Harlem River, and I want to show you the birth of hip-hop in Bronx. About 2 months ago or so, I made a video about a former New York baseball team, the Dodgers, and I showed the former side of Ebbets Field, their stadium. I thought, why not do the same with the second baseball team, the New York Giants, and their stadium? Ebbets Field, where the Dodgers played, was demolished in 1960 and apartment buildings were built on that side. Whereas the Polo Grounds, where the Giants played, was demolished 4 years later in 1964, and afterwards, well, as you see, the Polo Grounds towers. Apartments were also built on the side. Although there is still one thing that dates back from the days of the Polo Grounds, and that is the John Brush Stairway in Highbridge Park. John Brush was the owner of the baseball team, New York Giants. He bought them in 1890 and stayed with them until his death in 1912. The stairway was built shortly after his passing. John had locomotor ataxia. I just had to look it up as I did not want to get the proper name of it incorrect, which is ultimately a progressive disease in which you cannot fully control your own body movement. Hence, he later walked with canes. After he passed away, his son-in-law, Harry Hempstead, became the owner for a few years. Now, the place was called Polo Grounds because the original stadium was built and used for polo. The sport played on horses and a mallet to hit a ball, which, by the way, is one of the oldest sports. The original stadium stood here from 1876 until 1889. However, in 1880, it was converted to a baseball stadium for the New York Metropolitans, which was a short-lived New York baseball team that played in Polo Grounds, I think for about 5 years or so. Then the team was sold and moved to Staten Island. However, after 2 years, they were bought by the New York Dodgers and they simply ceased to exist. Or did they? Today, New York has two baseball teams, the New York Yankees and the New York Mets. So technically, when the New York Mets began playing in the 1960s, the name Mets was chosen as really a continuation of the Metropolitans, the Mets. In fact, the Mets played at Polo Grounds for 2 seasons before moving to Queens to Shea Stadium, and today they're playing at Citi Field, which I covered a little bit in my video about the Dodgers. In 1890, the stadium was demolished and a new one was built in its place and became home of the New York Giants. Well, before being called New York Giants, they were actually called the New York Gotham. But not only the Giants played there, but also, for example, Yankees for a few years, until the Yankee Stadium was built in 1923. New York Giants also played here, the American football team, as well as another football team, the Jets, in the 1960s, right before the stadium was demolished. Not to mention, there was other sports here, like for example, soccer games and boxing matches. So it was really an electric place for its time. In fact, in the early 1900s, New York City really was one of the main cities providing entertainment through sports and things like horse racing, among other things. Hence, these early stadiums like the Ebbets Fields for the Dodgers and the Polo Grounds for the Giants played a very important venues. In 1911, there was a major fire which heavily damaged the stadium. However, it was rebuilt rather quickly. Nevertheless, by the 1950s, there were major economic problems. The neighborhood, for example, began to experience a downfall. There was small parking for cars, which were becoming tremendously popular by now. And Yankees, for example, moved out to their own stadium, hence decreasing the revenue for this one. Many such factors contributed to the financial difficulties. By now, the New York Dodgers already had plans to move to Los Angeles, California, and so the Giants followed them by going to San Francisco, California, in part actually to keep the rivalry going between the two teams, leaving New York with the New York Yankees. And then in the 1960s, the Mets joined the scene. If any of you watched my video about the New York Dodgers and Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, one thing I found a little bit disappointing was that there was not much attention paid to the history of the stadium that used to stand there. In fact, like I showed, it even said no ball playing, which was a bit weird, because with a little money and some imagination, there was certainly room to create more space in front of the buildings for kids and families. Here, there's a little bit of a different vibe. There are more places for kids to play in front of the buildings, and in general, a little bit more attention is paid to the history of what used to be here. For example, the Polo Grounds Community Center, which on one side, on the wall, it has a plaque commemorating the fight of the century. In 1923, a major heavyweight boxing championship fight in which Jack Dempsey, the heavyweight champion, defended his title in front of more than 88,000 people. So on the plaque, it says it was the largest crowd to attend a boxing match in the history of New York State at that time. Then there are some paintings on the wall which show the Polo Grounds Stadium, like you see here, and the number 24, which I believe was Willie Mays, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I'm not a hardcore baseball fan. However, he unfortunately passed away this year in 2024, and so I believe that he wore the number 24. And of course, we have a place marking the home plate of the Polo Grounds Stadium, right here by one of the entrances to the building. Now, one thing that really caught my attention, as you see here, it says that the New York Giants were world champions in 1904, 1905, 1921, 22, 1933, and 1954, while they were here in New York. But if I'm not mistaken, there was no World Series played in baseball in 1904, as the New York Giants refused to play the team who are today the Boston Red Sox. So there was no 1904 World Series in baseball. So I'm kind of curious about this marker, why it has the year 1904. Maybe I'm missing something. Again, I'm not an expert on baseball. I know some stuff, especially the historical stuff, but I don't know, that kind of just caught my attention. However, the point is that if you really walk around these apartment buildings, there is definitely places that you can point out that pay tribute to the Polo Grounds Stadium that used to stand here. So since I was already here, let me show you one more place. This one dealing with not sport history, but music history. So for this, we need to walk across the river to the borough of Bronx. So let's walk across the High Point Bridge, which is the oldest bridge in New York City, opening in 1848. Let me just make my way down these steep stairs, but it does show you the changes in elevation in this part of Manhattan. I don't remember exactly what I said about this bridge, but I already did show it in one of my earlier videos on this channel, as I remember I made a video showing some places in the neighborhood which were around the Presbyterian Hospital, which is nearby. So I do not want to go into too many details, but this bridge was part of the first major water supply system for New York City, bringing water from the Croton River from Westchester County, using gravity like during the days of the Roman Empire, a system which ran for about 40 miles. In 1890, a new Croton aqueduct system was opened, which essentially runs parallel to the old one, and the bridge slowly became obsolete and with time closed. In the background, you see the water tower, which was later installed. Next to it, there was a reservoir. Today, it's a pool, which basically pumped the water into the tower to provide better water supply and pressure for the growing city. The bridge was closed for about 40 years since the 1970s and only reopened to the public in 2015, so very recently. You get very beautiful views from the bridge. One side, you see the approaches to the George Washington Bridge and the Alexander Hamilton Bridge, while from the other side, you see the Macombs Dam Bridge in the distance. And as you see, the weather was not great. There was light rain, but you know what? Just to show you that New York City does not always have beautiful and sunny days, which I generally try to pick in order to record my locations. Here is how the city looks like on a gloomy day that is raining. But once we are on the other side in Bronx, let's walk through the streets to these apartment buildings and arrive at 1520 Segwig Avenue, where we have the birth of hip-hop, or what was sometimes referred to as disco rap, as a music genre in the 1970s. Well, the history of hip-hop, as with anything, is not so simple to break it down to just one person or one event. But here we had DJ Kool Herc, who was a resident in this apartment building and who is considered one of the founders of hip-hop music in the 1970s. And of course, by 1990s, the genre really took off with famous turntable scratchings, breakdancing, and giving rise to other subgenres like gangster rap, for instance. And as you see, the building pays homage to those days of the beginning of hip-hop, which is pretty cool, and maybe something to visit for anyone interested in this history or music, for example. Okay, now let's cross back to Manhattan as the rain was beginning to pick up, and at this point we are going to go back on that bridge in the background, which is Washington Bridge, not to be confused with George Washington Bridge, which crosses into New Jersey. But yeah, this is a little bit of a confusing situation sometimes, because the bridge between Bronx and Manhattan over the Harlem River is called Washington Bridge, whereas on the other side, the bridge between New York and New Jersey over the Hudson River is the George Washington Bridge. This one, Washington Bridge, was opened to the public in 1888. And it's kind of interesting. As you see here, the pedestrian pathway is very small and tight. As I was passing people going the opposite direction, we all had some small battles with our umbrellas. Here's a view from the bridge of the apartment buildings we just took a look at. But take a look at this. Today it is fenced off, but you have like seats on the bridge. But it's wild to see this today. As you can imagine, someone could have stood on these steps and simply looked over the very, very low wall. I am guessing that for a taller person, the wall would not even really reach their waistline. So accidentally tipping over and falling is the first thing that came to my mind. I guess they had a lot more trust in people back then than they do today. Although there are some places, like you saw in my last video about crossing the RFK Bridge, that still are pretty scary even today. I think here you clearly see the rain falling, so I will quickly try to run back to my car, and I hope you enjoyed this very short video for this week. And if the stars align for me, next week I will drive up to a really special place which you will not want to miss. But until then, stay safe, and I will see you soon. Bye.